Well, hello, welcome everyone. My name is Jennifer Barron-Thrall, and I'm a program manager for the South-Southwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center. I am very pleased to be your host for this webinar, and today's presentation is titled Working with Others Who Are Overwhelmed. It is facilitated by Sarri Gilman, who is amazing. Some of you may have gotten a chance to see Sarri at her webinar last week. We're really pleased to have her back with us today. This is great. So this is the second webinar then of a series of workshops that Sarri is doing over the next several weeks. And I believe that the timing couldn't be better for the wisdom that she has to share about well-being. So we're really glad that you're here to share this information together. Thank you all for joining us. We truly hope that you find today's presentation engaging and helpful in your work. As I had mentioned just before this webcast, this is being sponsored then by our South-Southwest MHTTC, which is the Mental Health Technology Transfer Center. And looking at this map here, you'll see that there are MHTTC regions all over the country. This particular event is being hosted by our South-Southwest team, which is located in Region 6. The purpose of our MHTTC is to develop and strengthen the specialized behavioral healthcare and primary healthcare workforce that provides mental health prevention, treatment, and recovery support services. Really, our goal is to help people and organizations ultimately incorporate effective practices into mental health services. So after this presentation, take a moment to visit our website, and you can also check out kind of those other regions to see what resources are located where you all live. This presentation, just by way of disclaimer, was prepared then for the MHTTC network under a cooperative agreement from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, also known as SAMHSA. The opinions expressed in the presentation are the views of our speaker and do not reflect the official position of the Department of Health and Human Services, or SAMHSA. Okay, well, let's get started. I am very, very pleased then to introduce our speaker. Sarri Gilman is a licensed marriage and family therapist and author. She teaches Overwhelm recovery for healthcare and human service providers. Sarri is awesome. She is a prolific writer and has published 3 books. She's the author of The Mystery of Knowing Journal, and that's a journal for self-care boundaries, Transform Your Boundaries, and Naming and Taming Overwhelm for healthcare and human service providers. Sarri ran nonprofit organizations for 20 years, and 2 of the organizations served children and teens who are homeless. She's the founder of Cocoon House in Everett, Washington. She taught leadership development for 7 years, and she's been in practice for 35 years and continues in private practice in her beautiful community on Whidbey Island, Washington. So with that, I'm so pleased then to introduce Sarri, and we look forward to hearing from you today, Sarri.
Thank you. Oh, it is such an honor to be here. And as I've been watching in the chat and seeing where everybody is signing in from, welcome. I am so honored that you would spend this hour this morning with us and with me. And I hope that it feels really worthwhile for you. And I want to remind you that this is part of a series. So each section will stand alone, but today we are in session number 2. And like Jennifer said, session 1 is available as a recording for you if you missed it last time. And this work that I am sharing with you comes from work that I started doing in 2008 and 2009 through the economic collapse at that time. And a book was published in 2017 based on that work. And I have added now some more concepts into the Overwhelm recovery work that's most relevant to the pandemic. And so in the first session, I really went through steps for your own personal recovery through Overwhelm. And so that's not going to be covered in today's session. That was in the last session. So do go back and catch that if you missed that. And I did also cover moral injury in that session. And so today may feel like, well, wait, what about all those other topics? Well, yes, we got to those topics last time, and we're getting to further topics as we go along. I'll be covering a session on secondary trauma and a session just on boundaries. And in between, we'll also have discussion groups. So I'll tell you about that at the end of today's session. But today, we're here to address how to protect your own well-being while you're working with overwhelmed colleagues and clients, and understand how to create and maintain and strengthen your own self-care plan. And we're going to look at some of the effects of the pandemic and what seems to help the most, and managing the expectations that you have of yourself and others while we are continuing to face widespread overwhelm. There are some ground rules for today that I really want you to remember. It is totally okay if you have completely different opinions about everything that I'm talking about. And I embrace the fact that we may see things very differently. So this is really just the lens at which I see things, but I'm open to the way that you see things. And please take care of yourself today during the session. Many people could be very close to a lot of grief or trauma from what we've been through and what we're still going through. And if you need to close or take a break or step away from the computer, please do so, and catch the recording later or at another time if that's best for you. I'm not intending to go deep into traumatic events today. I do have a session scheduled with all of you that will be on trauma and secondary trauma. But I want you to take care of yourself as you need to. You may be coming to this session very full from your week, this particular week, or just from yesterday. And so I really want you to just be aware of yourself as we go through this and just do what you need to do for you. This has all been a lot to hold. And there's no way that you can expect yourself to always be able to carry everything. Part of dealing with overwhelm is not that it's sort of like you get overwhelmed once and then you're through it, as you've seen in now this pandemic that's been going for a year, plus all the other things on top of it, the fight for racial justice, climate change issues, historical trauma, some of the experience of political trauma that we've all been through. This is a lot to hold. And there is no way that you can carry all of it or expect yourself not to go into states of overwhelm. You will go into states of overwhelm, but then we will get through those states of overwhelm. So it's something that, we come in and out of. And again, that's very explained in session 1. So please go back to that if you missed it. And some of you are coming in from outside the country, but this past week in the United States, in California, that is a major highway that completely collapsed down by Big Sur in California. And it really spoke to me as a statement of overwhelm, just kind of dealing with all the things that everyone has already been dealing with. And then you get something like this happen in your neighborhood, and your roads are stopped going in and out for who knows how long. This could be going on for months and months there. So you do what you can in any given situation, but remembering the whole while that you're in the situation too with everybody. And so there may be additional things happening in your community that are even making this time harder. So today we're really also looking at what happens when overwhelm is all around you, everywhere that you look. When I used to teach on overwhelm recovery prior to the pandemic, I would teach and explain to people that not everyone can do community work during overwhelm recovery. It takes great skill and commitment to care for yourself while you care for others. You must be exceptional at the self-care in order to do overwhelm community work when it's right in your face and all around you. But many of you now, and probably all of you, are dealing with overwhelm everywhere, and it is no longer optional. So my hope is that in this series of 6 sessions, it helps you deal with what we're all facing and care for yourself within it. So these are 6 very simple steps that I think anybody can do when you're dealing with overwhelm at work. And the irony about overwhelm is that while overwhelm is dense and complicated, the things that actually help us through them are very simple. They are not dense and complicated. And if you take one thing from the webinar today, I want you to take that the steps are simple. And so when we're dealing with overwhelm at work, these are 6 steps anybody can do. The first thing is to always have a clear sense of your priorities. And you have to reprioritize as you go through things because we're dealing with a situation now where things change. You know, one day the vaccine is available in your community, the next day all the appointments were canceled and the vaccine is not available. All of your healthcare workers thought they were going to get vaccinated, and then it turns out they were not included on the list and their vaccine got redirected somewhere else. Or there was an issue with shipping and trucking to get the vaccine to you. So our priorities are constantly moving in the time that we're in right now. And you have to be aware of what's on top for you because not everything can be a priority. When everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. And so as a practicing therapist in my small community, I have a limited number of openings and a very long wait list, but I do prioritize getting people in where there was a suicide in the family last week. I made sure that person got in. There was a death in the family. I made sure they got in. Or if the person is a healthcare provider in the community, I make sure I see them. If they are a first responder or a healthcare person or an educator, they all get priority on my schedule. So I know what my priorities are. And I'm also aware that, you know, there's still limits and capacity of what I'm capable of doing. So I want you to stay aware of your priorities, who you serve, and what's on top for you and what you might need to let go of. There's a lot of things I'd have to let go of because not everything can be a priority. Another thing is to shorten emails and meetings. You know, some people during this pandemic at work, they've been sending out these really lengthy, complicated, long emails. When people are overwhelmed, they can't process that kind of information. And so it all just starts flying by you. It's just too much. And if it is too much, that's a really important conversation to have internally. Everybody needs to tighten things up. Keep your emails in bullet points, lists. Here's 3 things you need to know, and don't go past that. I was working with a school where they sent out an 8-page letter to the staff. I'm like, an 8-page letter? This is a novella. Who is going to read this right now? People are too overwhelmed. And what happens is when you send out a whole lot of information by email, people miss the priorities because they can't sort through all of this while they're in states of overwhelm, because it really affects your problem solving and your thinking skills. So tighten everything up, shorten everything, and keep your meetings as short as possible. Nobody needs to spend extra time online, and nobody needs to feel like their time is wasted, because people that are serving right now on the front line have pretty short attention spans for having their time wasted and nonsense. And so you want to be sure that you're diving right in and getting to the heart of things and then getting out with them and not doing excessive wasting of time. The other step is to do self-care while you're on the job. Please don't forget to go to the bathroom. Don't forget to eat your lunch. It's okay to stop and take a break and turn on a little music and listen to a 3-minute song. It's okay to close your eyes and have a meditation center. I brought a yoga mat to my office for the first time ever. I've never had a yoga mat in my office. I've never taken a yoga break. But now, during the pandemic, in between my sessions at my lunch break, I make sure that I get on my yoga mat and I do some stretching in between because it's a lot of sitting and intense listening in front of a computer. The other thing everyone can do to reduce overwhelm is to make sure that you are doing quality listening when you are with someone. Pay attention, especially with your colleagues. If someone is talking to you, it's not looking at your phone, it's not being disrupted by email, it's not opening up the door. It is give people quality attention. That listening is the thing that goes the furthest when we are at work with each other. The next is to do some connection and team building. I know that's really been a challenge with a lot of things going online, but you are often part of a team or part of a community. And it is really important to have small connection, team building moments, whatever you find those to be. For me, it's sharing poetry with my colleagues, but for you, it might be something else. And the other is to remember to respond to your emails and your messages, particularly from your teammates or your supervisor or the people that you supervise. A lot of times in this pandemic, people feel like they've sent an urgent email to someone or asked a question and it just went into the ethers. It never got answered. There's so much not getting responded to. And we need to really give that some better time and attention and respond to people. It is providing tremendous relief in the pandemic, even if it's something you can't get to until 2 weeks from now. And you say to somebody, I will get back to you on this in 2 weeks, but I got your email. Keep it short, but be responsive. The non-responsiveness is actually damaging to people who are at work. It is part of the injury that they are experiencing in their souls, that there is so much being ignored. Here are some other steps that really help, particularly if you are working with an overwhelmed supervisor. They can work with other people, but if your supervisor is overwhelmed, these are steps that have to get taken. So the first is discuss ways to reduce and streamline. Sometimes your supervisor is not the best person at organizing and streamlining. Your supervisor might be best at some other skills, but if you have great ideas, like, a better way to do this would be blah, 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 really bring those up to the top, because getting streamline into anything that we're doing right now really helps. And if you have those project management skills and can share them with others, or tips that you're doing that make it easier for you to manage things, share those. So for example, a really simple thing that I do is every time I have a meeting link, I have a little folder in my email that just says meeting links. And then every time I have something where I'm getting a link for it that I'm supposed to attend, I just stick it in there so I know where to go to find my meeting links. But I see people not doing that because they're constantly sending me messages going, can you resend me the link? I don't have the link. Are you going to send that out again? I'm like, oh, I guess people don't even have that simple streamlining method. So share your tips. The next is discuss overload with your supervisor. Your supervisor is not keeping track of how overloaded you are, but you need to keep them on track and letting them know, I am at capacity, I'm over capacity, I'm on overload. This needs to be brought back down, or we need to get temporary help, or you cannot assign more right now. But if you're not giving feedback, they don't know how overloaded you are. And if you are just taking it and taking it, you're going to get to the breaking point. The next is to protect yourself from your supervisor's overwhelm. Yep, If your supervisor is totally overwhelmed, which almost every supervisor is right now, they may be overwhelming you. And so it's really important to recognize that they have to manage their load, and you cannot take on their overwhelm on top of your own overwhelm. And so it's really okay to start looking at how you are going to use your boundaries to protect yourself. And I'm going to do a whole session on boundaries, and you can kind of pick from that some ways to do that. Another is to establish boundaries that work for you around everyone. During the pandemic, particularly, you cannot expect people to give you the boundaries that are going to work for you. And this is true during any extreme challenge, because I often teach about how to manage traumatic, challenging situations. And this is a skill that we all have to be using, which is you have to take responsibility for the boundaries that are going to work for you. You have to be clear about how to set those up in a way that is manageable for you, because other people are not going to necessarily bring the clarity and the boundaries that you need. And while that can be very disappointing, and you may feel very uncared for in your work, I want you to understand that under extreme challenges, every one of us has to be defining the boundaries and bringing clarity, because other people are not thinking about that. And then it's really important to predict and plan for what you need from your supervisor. So, since we know most supervisors and leaders are completely overwhelmed right now, it really helps to plan in advance what you need from the person that is supervising or leading, and give them heads up like, hey, this thing is coming, but I'm going to need this information from you by Tuesday the 17th. And so now it's the 11th. I'm just giving you a reminder that this is coming, because a lot of times supervisors have so much to track, and they are so overwhelmed with how much more they're being asked to track that a lot of things can slip through, and the things that you need may not be getting to your desk. So I want you to set up a system where you keep reminding people of dates that are important and things that are coming that you need from people. And then the final one is expect mistakes, particularly from your supervisors. Expect mistakes from leaders and show kindness. Kindness is the most important thing that we can bring to everybody right now. No special training required. Just be super kind to people. People are making mistakes because they are overwhelmed. And as I explained in session 1, overwhelm has some very specific effects on the brain, and it makes problem solving and making decisions really difficult. And so when that's happening, we're going to see a lot of mistakes. And the only thing that we can do in that is be kind to each other that mistakes are being made. I would be expecting them. For those that are supervisors that are tuned in, because I know there are a lot of supervisors who are listening, really important for you to help people with what are the priorities and help manage the load down, because otherwise you're just going to have very high turnover and continue to lose people that work for you that you really need on the team, and they're not replaceable at this point. All of you who are on the call are not replaceable. You're all precious and you're all needed. Another thing that supervisors can do is to focus on the weakest area in the organization. It's like looking at a boat and asking if it has a hole in it. And if it has a hole in it, repair the hole. Like, look for the wobbliest, weakest point in the organization and work on strengthening that first. In our community, I have an example about the vaccine lately. So, people were scheduled to be getting the vaccine, and they were being given out at our local hospital. And then a neighboring town called and said they were forgotten on the vaccine list, and none of their first responders or healthcare workers had access to the vaccine because their community was forgotten. And so they took the appointments from our community and took our vaccine allotment and made it available to the neighboring town, so to make sure that their first responders were covered and their healthcare workers were covered. Now, some people who were getting these emails that their appointments were gone were really upset, because every time something changes during the pandemic, people get really frustrated and it becomes a target for the anger and the frustration. But those of us who are in this at this point, we do need to realize that nothing works smoothly, and even the vaccine, the appointments, the things that you can predict and count on are not going smoothly. But there were some of us that were actually very relieved that the town over was remembered and that there was a way to help them, and that we wouldn't move forward until they were caught up. And there's something about looking at the weakest area. What good would it do if our town was moving forward with the next phase of giving out vaccines when the town right next door to us hadn't even started on the first round? So that's looking at the holes in the boat, and we're going to see lots of them, and leaders and supervisors have to always keep their eye on that. And so it does feel like you're always patching emergency, because you have to keep your eye on the weakest areas. But when we're dealing with entire communities that are overwhelmed, which most communities are experiencing right now, the things that we can bring that help the most are very simple. First of all, you have to earn trust when you're dealing with community overwhelm, and you have to remember that you're earning trust every day. Trust doesn't necessarily go very far if the people in the community don't know you very well. And so you're always earning people's trust. And you have to think about the ways that you do that that helps to earn trust. So, for example, as my practice is full, one of the ways that I maintain trust with the people that are reaching out and wanting psychotherapy appointments that I don't have is I let people know that either they can, wait a little while and we can get the appointment booked now for further out, or I can help them find another therapist. And that means helping them find another therapist. I don't just give them a name or two. If they seem like they're functioning okay and they can just manage with a referral, that's great. But then I say to them, check back with me. Let me know you got scheduled. If you're having trouble getting scheduled and I can hear how overwhelmed they are, I will say, I will make a call. I will see if we can get you an appointment somewhere else. I am earning trust the whole time and maintaining that trust, because that's part of being a mental health therapist. That's my work with people, even if they're not my clients. The other is to listen in community overwhelm. So, what's really interesting to me is when there have been, tragic and traumatic events in communities, sometimes I get a call, and I'm sure some of you have had these calls. Can you come and do a presentation for the community on trauma? And I always say no. If there's been a very recent trauma, the community doesn't really need to hear me come speak. They actually need somebody to come and listen and hear from them what they're going through and sit with them. That's not the time for a speaking engagement. It's a listening engagement. And so when a community is overwhelmed, expect that what we're doing that helps the most is listening and just hearing the overwhelm and being with people in it. The next is to be predictable when you're doing community work and do the dirty work. So what I mean by that is, you come in and you see that, there's a pile of something that needs to get cleaned up, or or needs to get done, and somebody's got their sleeves rolled up, and you just roll up your sleeves next to them and you just help with taking out the trash or whatever else needs to get done, so that you step out of your role a little bit, but you're helping with what is very obviously needing to get done. That goes a long way in community work. People want to see that the people around them aren't above them, but are beside them, and aren't so stuck in a role that we don't recognize that, it's that big bag of trash over there just needs to be brought out to the can. That we just roll up our sleeves and help. That's really important in community overwhelm. Goes a long way to the people watching us, and that it shows them that we're on their team. The other thing that's key in doing community overwhelm work is giving breaks to everyone, helping people stop problem solving, and helping people rest. That's the most important message we can send out in the community. I can't tell you how many times I have seen in traumatic events in community where all the helpers are in and they're working kind of round the clock, and then people have heart attacks doing the work, or they die while doing their job at their desk because they haven't been getting breaks, they haven't been getting sleep, they haven't been getting rest. And people are carrying a lot in this pandemic. We are a year into a lot of trauma that has happened in a lot of communities. And people need a break from this, and there's no place to go to get a break. So you can be the one that helps people get that sort of mental health break and say to people, you know what, let's take a break from trying to solve that problem today. Let's give that a rest for today, and let's come back at it when you're fresh tomorrow or in 2 days from now. I had a really interesting thing happen. We have a friend of the family who contacted me and said, I haven't been sleeping. And so I'm going in and they're teaching me how to sleep, and starting at midnight and getting up at 6 a.m. And maybe this will help me with sleeping. I'm like, has anybody asked you what's gone on in your life? Like, do they know that your sibling died in the last 3 weeks? Do they know how you felt about the Capitol invasion? Do they know that you were a veteran and how that felt for you? No, there was no conversation about it. And so we are there to kind of help people get to the root of what's going on, but also help them rest as they need to while they are in it. So I'll share with you a little bit about what has helped me through this. As a painting of a crow at my beach, a beach that I walk to nearly every day. It's right up the street. And what has helped me in this has been changing my self-care routine completely. Like my friend who wasn't able to sleep, I had a really hard time at the start of the pandemic, and I was having lots of trouble sleeping. And the self-care things that I normally did, the routine that I normally did, wasn't available to me. The gym was closed. The friends that I go and visit, I couldn't see. So there was just a lot that had to shift. And where I found some relief was starting with a self-compassion practice. And what's nice about self-compassion is that you can do it anywhere. So for those of you who are familiar and have a self-compassion practice, um, you may think about ways that you share those practices with others. So I'm going to share with you just the very basics of self-compassion. The first step is you just feel whatever you're feeling. That is step one. Just know what you're feeling. Something painful just happened. Something difficult just happened. Just feel what you're feeling. The next step is acknowledging that it's part of the human struggle. Ask yourself, is this something that I'm feeling, that I'm experiencing, that if someone else was feeling it, they too would have a hard time right now, or they would find this difficult? Yes. And if the answer is yes, which I'm just going to tell you, it always is yes. Other people have experienced this too. Whatever this pain is, whatever this hurt is in your heart, whatever just blew your mind, other people have experienced it. So we just acknowledge, this is part of the human struggle. And the third step is, what can I do that would just be kind to me right now in the face of that? That's the whole thing. That is the beginning of self-compassion. And if you can just practice those 3 steps, you can do them absolutely anywhere. My practice is that I wake up first thing in the morning and I put my hand over my heart and I say, I don't know what you're going to see today. I don't know what you're going to hear today, but I've got you. I'm with you, and I will stay with you. And that is just my way of kind of using self-compassion to prepare for my day. Here is a resource that I really hope you dive into. It is a wonderful workbook. It's called the Mindful Self-Compassion Workbook. It is by Kristen Neff and Chris Germer. They are, very much, along with Paul Gilbert in England, he's very much compassion focused in therapy. He teaches compassion focused therapy. But in the United States, Neff and Germer teach self-compassion as well. And they have this workbook that is wonderful. It's like 2 pages of reading, and then you get like 4 exercises to practice. So even if you're overwhelmed, you can do this workbook. And what I recommend is that you get the workbook and go through it for yourself first, learn lots of steps of self-compassion, and then you can do it with clients. I do it with clients all the time. I have them get the book and then we read it together and we just do 1 chapter at a time. And it has made a big difference for people during the pandemic. A little warning about this is that once you start being kinder to yourself in the face of pain, you may get what we call a lot of backdraft. Like, when you open up a room where there's been smoke and fire and then like the fire whooshes out at you. If you haven't been very kind to yourself, you can get overwhelmed with memories in the past from the pain of never having really been good to yourself. And if you've had a history of abuse or neglect, self-compassion can start very painfully because you're finally giving to yourself something that you've always needed. So if you've had a history of abuse or neglect, they recommend that you always start with using visualization first of a sanctuary, a safe place, a place that feels really safe to you, and just start self-compassion with that. Just begin seeing that safe place for you. And you can do that any time of the day, anytime something difficult has happened. It's a simple practice, and then move yourself into the other practices. And the other question that you can ask yourself around self-compassion is, how can you increase your sense of safety and a feeling of protection? So in this picture, I had gone to Plum Village in France. Something I'd always wanted to go to in my life. I've long been reading Thich Nhat Hanh's words, and this was like kind of his spiritual sanctuary. And I got to go there for, just a little retreat. And this was a picture of a monk who is sitting on a swing. And I loved seeing that there. It just kind of reminded me of that sense of play and self-care. And even monks take breaks from meditating and focusing. And I just love seeing that. So I wanted to share that with you. Another practice that I find really helpful is each year I do a self-care wheel. And I make one for myself, and I also do it with clients, and I do it with everybody that I can reach, and I teach how to do a self-care wheel. So I would like to be sure that you have your self-care wheel going for 2021, because we're in February, so this is a perfect time to do it. Now, the cool thing about the self-care wheel is that when you are aware of your self-care practices, and you're working on them and you're tracking them like this by writing them down, you will notice that you start deepening into them year after year. And so I'd like you to start a practice of really keeping track of your self-care wheel. And so this is what the wheel is. You just draw on a piece of paper, a circle, and you make a big X in your circle and then a line down the middle. And that gives you 6 spots. And here in the picture next to it is my current self-care wheel for 2021. And you know, each year your wheel changes. There's different things that you need in your self-care, and it gives you time to really focus on creating your self-care. So here's how you fill in those areas. So one spot, one of those little pieces of pie, is for your foundation. And your foundation is eating, sleeping, exercising. So every time that you are thrown off your foundation, or you didn't get a good night's sleep, or you ate junk food, that is when you come back in your self-care, just focusing on getting your foundation back underneath you. And we come back to that a lot. When we get overwhelmed, we can easily get thrown off our foundation. Another section that I want you all to use is something that soothes you. What do you find soothing? Put that in a place in your wheel and then list all the things that you find soothing. Another is a sense of protection. What gives you a sense and a feeling of protection? And then what do you do for fun? Fun should be one of your sections. You can also have a screen recovery section. If you've been doing a lot of work online as a therapist, you may need some screen recovery time. And what are you doing for that? Another section could be your creative or spiritual section. Maybe reading is a section for you. Social, retreating, sanctuary, emotional, personal support. Any of these can be sections on your wheel. I want you to just pick 5 that you need the most. And they could be 5 that you are, you know, already doing that's really helping you, or it could be maybe aspirational. Maybe you don't have all these self-care areas going in your life right now, but I want you to pick a few things that are things that you think you could work towards in 2021 that could help you with your self-care. So these are just the broad categories. What I want you to do between now and next week, because we will talk about these in our discussion group next Friday, is I want you to drill down into what are the specific things that you do in these areas that are good for you in self-care. Okay, so this is my, that's my little self-care area. It's a place where I create. I do a lot of creative things, and that's where I like to paint and I draw, and I see all my seashells on the desk there. I have a seashell collection because I live on an island and I'm surrounded by beaches. So here is one of my moonshell paintings along with a little poem. I realize we're running late, so I want to get to some other material. So self-care may not prevent burnout in the pandemic and in climate change, and going from racial injustice to racial justice, equity, national government trauma, historical and intergeneration trauma, and moral injury. You know what? All the self-care that you do may not prevent burnout in the face of all of that. But what it will do is it'll help care for you in the face of everything. So even if you have felt really too exhausted to do your self-care, I want you to do it anyway. There's a Gallup study that 1 in 10 healthcare workers are thriving in the 5 elements of well-being. And Betsy's going to throw that study in the chat for you. And you need 3 areas to bounce back. And so the 5 areas are purpose, social, community, physical, and financial. And you need 3 of those to be going well to bounce back from adversity. And healthcare workers only had 1 in 10 people had all 5 elements going okay. And that was before the pandemic. Post-pandemic, I don't think we're going to rank even as high as that. And so I just want you to be aware that those areas are good areas to pay attention to. And as we were entering the pandemic, I was dealing with 4 deaths of people in my practice. One was a child. And in the face of all that grief, I kind of stopped all my social connecting, backed away from my friends. So I lost the social area. And my husband was retiring, so I was feeling a lot of financial worry. And of course, the whole economy around us was collapsing. And so I was feeling a lot of financial concern. And my community was suffering. And so there were 4 deaths. And so we were all grieving, and there was a lot going on in the community. And so I wasn't hitting all those areas either. But it's important to know about those areas because I could then catch myself from falling and help myself back up. And I think that's the way to kind of look at our self-care in this, is that it's a way to pick ourselves back up and keep ourselves moving. But by no means do I think this is going to inoculate you from all of the stress and all of the pain that everyone has been through. And the length of time of all of this. Nobody's self-care plan can possibly manage them all the way through this. There are going to be good days. There are going to be awful days. And there are going to be periods of overwhelm. And then there are going to be times when you're able to pull yourself back out. And your self-care is your rope line. This is the thing that's going to save you. This is the thing that's going to help you climb back out each and every time. So you must have one. Here's a little poem by Cynthia Ocelli. For a seed to achieve its greatest expression, it must come completely undone. The shell cracks, its insides come out, and everything changes. To someone who doesn't understand growth, it would look like complete destruction. So sometimes I think about seeds and what they go through, that phase of complete destruction, to just help remind me to keep grabbing onto my rope line and my growth line to help pull me back in. So I want you to remember the biggest takeaway from today is that kindness helps the most. If you can do anything else, be kind to yourself and be kind to others in the face of all this. That will get us very far. That will get you through. So just focus on the kindness, feeling the grief that we're going through. And in the upcoming sessions, our next session, we're going to have a discussion group. And that's really important. It's just not me talking at you, but we're going to take everything from session 1, some key points from session 2, and we're going to talk about them. And I think hearing your experiences and your thoughts are really important in this. And then the sessions after that will be on boundaries and on secondary trauma. And then we'll have another discussion group session to focus on those parts. So thank you for joining us today. I'll take questions now. Do we have questions? Jennifer?
Yes, thank you, Sarri. That was outstanding. I really appreciate all that you shared with us today. And we do have questions. I'll go ahead and jump into them now. The first one is from Stephanie. Stephanie asks, after 11 months into COVID and lack of physical connection is being made with staff, how do you keep morale up? This is, of course, knowing that the situation leading up to now has made it very stressful and an overwhelming experience.
Yes. So Stephanie, was that her name, Stephanie?
Yes, that's
Stephanie,
correct.
I don't think you can take responsibility to keep everyone's morale up. So I want you to put that down right now. That is not your job. You don't have to keep everybody up. But what you can do is ask people to share things that are meaningful. And that does help with morale. having people share little parts of the day that were particularly meaningful to them or where they felt like they actually did make a difference. Those stories, capturing those and sharing those build momentum, and they do help with morale. They help people remember that they're going through all of this because it's making a difference and because of that one person that they were able to help today, or they saw somebody that wouldn't have gotten seen otherwise. So I want you to ask your team to keep sharing out in literally in one sentence what gave them inspiration? What did they see where they felt they made an impact or something that touched their hearts deeply? It could have been, something that they saw on the coffee line. It could have been anywhere. And that is going to help with morale the most. Okay. And it'll be points of connection between them. So it'll also do that team building piece that we talked about. But I do not want you to feel responsible for everyone's morale. I just think that's too much to carry.
Sarri. We have another question from Colleen. She asks, can you repeat the 5 areas we need to help us bounce back from adversity?
Yes, and I think Betsy is giving you the link to the article in the chat so that you actually have the Gallup article. And it is purpose, social, community, physical, and financial. It's interesting because people don't talk about finances a whole lot when they talk about self-care, but if your finances are upside down, that can be really overwhelming and make you feel like you can't care for yourself. So those areas seem really significant. So you need 3 out of 5 to bounce back from adversity. And then if you see where you're kind of coming down the ladder in any of those, you can kind of pull yourself back up or work on it to realize that you need that better to help with your self-care. Thanks for asking that.
Thank you, Colleen. That was a great question. All right, this next one is from Stephanie. When staff comes to you as a director and are in that stage of panic or overwhelmed, but there's no control or change in the situation that can be made, how do you address it?
I sit with them and let them talk to me about the grief of having to go through this. And what I think we can help as directors and program leaders to understand is that this time of trauma has also opened up for people into places of trauma that were maybe unintegrated in the past. So if you're working with people that are falling through this time and they're so blown out by the things that are happening, part of it is also they may be dealing with layers of trauma inside where, that panic that sets in because things are unpredictable, because things do keep changing. And you want to sit with them and really think of yourself like you are telling a very scared kid a story, but this is a grown-up in front of you. But you want to talk to them calmly, and you want to talk to them like you're telling a little kid a story, and you're acknowledging that things are very unpredictable, and this is very scary. And we don't know what's going to happen next in this. When have we been there before? And yet the next day was okay. Can you find one thing in the day that is okay for you right now? What can be your sanctuary in all of this fear? Sometimes we also have to refer people for some extra support. Really important when they are completely in a state of panic is we need to get you some extra support and hold them accountable to following through for some extra support and say, you deserve that. I want you to have that. You can't go through that in this state of panic all the time. That's too hard on you. It's too hard on your adrenal system. It's too hard on your immune system. It's too hard on every part of you. Let's get you some help.
Thank you, Sarri. A couple of questions, a real quick one, just because I've had a couple of folks ask, Sarri, what is the name and author of the poem that you just read with the seed? Can you just say that the name?
Cynthia Ocelli, Occelli, Cynthia Ocelli. No, Occelli. Yeah, and it's called The Mantra for New Beginnings.
Thank you.
And I'm the queen of little tiny short poems. I like the shorter the better. Yeah.
We have one more question, and it's a larger one, but wanted to get your opinion but how can we prevent compassion fatigue? Do you have any thoughts about that, like kind of from a prevention perspective?
Okay, so in what we have all been carrying in this time, I'm not sure you can completely prevent it. There are going to be times when you may feel very worn down. And what we have to do in those moments is we have to take care of ourselves and climb back out using our self-care skills. And we have to recognize we're falling below the waterline here. We're starting to drown under. I don't expect you to never feel compassion fatigue in all of this. But what helps is a gratitude practice. And you have to do it very consciously and every single day and all through the day. You have to look for those moments where you can see something that makes you grateful or give yourself a rest and a distraction. I carry around with me, this is really fun. This Layers of Meaning book, and it's a visual journal book. And see, it's like covered with like artwork. See, it's just all artwork. And I take breaks and I look for little details in the pictures. There's always something I haven't seen before. And that drilling in, that refocusing gives my mind a rest from the pain and the problems. It just allows me to refocus. And it gives me that breathing space. I just need a little bit of a breathing space. And then I find something, and I try to find things all through the day that give me gratitude. What I find helps me the most is looking up at the sky. First of all, it's always there, no matter what. The sky is there every single day. It may be raining, it may be cloudy, it may be dark. I live in the Northwest. It's often dark and rainy and stormy. But every day I look up at the sky. At night I see stars. It's been amazing. I'm watching the moon, and that helps me to see a bigger picture. So it helps me with the compassion fatigue because I don't really feel a lack of compassion for my clients because I do feel the pain that they're in. And I don't feel that for my fellow healthcare workers. I feel devastated seeing what you've all been through. So I'm not feeling a lack of compassion for there, but when we get very burned out, when we haven't been able to care for ourselves, we can feel that that too much, that capacity, that needing to pull away. And when you're feeling that, it's important to pull away. It's important to retreat. It's important to give yourself something of a sanctuary. And so in our discussion group next Friday, we're going to talk about those sanctuaries and how some people are doing with sanctuaries, what's working, and maybe you'll get some ideas from other people on how we're all creating a little sanctuary for us and how much you need them.